Okay, I'm going to go over the int array homework, not all of it, but some of the more difficult parts of it. So I'm starting here with int array remove test. Int array remove, I think I think you would all agree, is the more difficult of the 4 labs. So I'm going to start there. When I try to run it, I have problems because I haven't implemented anything. But the first problem we're getting is int array equals. And int array equals is actually used inside of int array remove test to check whether or not this array, after the number 4 is removed from it, equals this array right here. So that happens right there. So let's pop into int array equals and implement that because we need it. So here's the one that we're comparing. I think everybody who submitted the homework got this right. So it's a few different steps. We return false if it's null. So if compare me is null, return false. If they have different lengths, we would want to return false. So since we're also returning false in some other case, let's just use an or here. Compare me.length. If that doesn't equal this .data.length, we can return false. And then if the data within the array is not the same, we would also want to return false. And if that doesn't return false, we'd want to return true. So I'll go ahead and just do that right here so I don't forget. But now let's check whether the data in the array is the same and in the same order. So we will loop over one array. Let's loop over compare me. So for int I is 0, I is less than compare me length, I++. If compare me I doesn't equal this .data I, if that ever happens, we would want to return false. And otherwise, we would return true. Now, as I said before, you should comment your code, but I'm just doing this fairly quickly here so that I can get remove to work, because remove is what I want to actually dive into. So let's run it again, see if we're any closer. All right, we got a little farther. We see that one test passed. It was this test right here. But now we have this method did not remove the element 2, which makes sense because I haven't implemented that. So we have to go into remove and implement that. So let's pop into, actually let's vertically split here, and let's implement remove. Now, okay, here's one thing I saw a lot of that I think is, I gave you credit for it if you did it this way, but I believe it is not in the spirit of the learning goals for this assignment. But I'll do it this way anyway, which basically it boils down to using an array list. So the first challenge is to turn our int array into an array list. And if you Googled how to convert int array into list of integer in Java, you might have come across this Stack Overflow post. I'm not going to go into this code right now. Let's just copy paste it for a second. Because like I said, this is actually not the solution I recommend. I think it misses the point of the assignment. But let's do it anyway just because maybe it'll be fun. So here we're going to create a list. I'm just going to call that list power tool because that's the point here, is that we're using a power tool to do some work. And it makes things a little bit too easy. We're going to put this .data right here, and then collectors. Let's import that. Okay, so everything works. This array stream boxed collect line turns our primitive array of ints into a list of integers. And now that it's a list and not an array, there's so much stuff that you can do that's really very powerful, and I highly recommend it if it's not a homework assignment. Like, for example, we can just say power tool dot remove value. Now we just have to turn our list of integer, our power tool, back into the kind of type that we want, to the primitive int array, for which you can use Google again, how to convert an array list containing integers to a primitive int array. And once again, not going to go into it, but let's just grab it. Let's just grab it and say this dot data equals, and let's say power tool dot stream blah 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 blah, and that theoretically will do it. So that's a 3-line solution to this problem. Let's see if it passes the test, just to sanity check whether or not it really is a solution. I'll run it. Yes, proceed. Let's see where we got some errors. So index out of bounds is happening right here. Yes, right. This is the wrong power tool. This is removing the index for, I guess 4 is coming in for remove. So we really want to remove that value, which I think you can say something like power tool dot index of that value. Oops. Value. Yes, so we remove the index where that value occurs. Try again. Proceed. But index of, in fact, could be -1 if it doesn't exist. So I guess it's a little bit more complicated. So we can say int index to remove is this right here. We'll say index to remove right here. And then we'll only do this if index to remove does not equal -1. Now, I believe it will pass the tests. Let's try it. Semicolon. Now I believe it will pass the test. Let's do it. Okay, there we go. Yes, so the test passed. Test pass, and we're able to do it in about 4 lines. But again, it misses the point. Even if, by the way, even if you didn't find the right Stack Overflow stuff and you had to loop over your int array in order to construct some kind of list so that you could call remove or index of, even if you had to do that extra work, still you're using a power tool here that gives you index of and remove for free. And I think that it misses the point. So there is a solution to this that doesn't use array list at all, and that is what I would recommend. So let's delete all the fancy stuff that we're using here. Let's delete this solution, and let's see if we can solve it without bringing in array list at all. Let's just stay in the land of primitive values and simple arrays. Now, the reason simple arrays are a little bit annoying to deal with is that you can't resize them, so we have to create a new one. So let's do that first. So int new array is going to be a new int array whose length is going to be the same as data -1, assuming the value exists. We'll handle the case where it doesn't exist in a moment. But we'll say this.data.length is less than 1, or -1. So it'll be a new array with one less slot in it. And then we have to get the data out of the data array into new array. And at the end of the day, we'll say this.data equals new array. And that'll be the last thing we do. So somewhere in here, we have to remove or start copying over stuff from this.data into new array, skipping the value we want to remove. So let's do a loop that implements that idea. We'll say int I is 0, I is less than this dot data dot length, because we actually want to go through everything in data. So we'll say if the thing that we're looking at, this dot data dot sub I, is not equal to value, then we want to put that into new array. And you might have tried this. So basically take that thing that we're looking at this iteration of the loop and stick it into that same slot in new array. But it doesn't quite work, because once we get to the value that we want to exclude, then we're going to be one ahead in terms of indexes. We're going to be one ahead in data than we are in new array. So what I saw a lot of you do, and I think is perfectly fine, is store the index into new array in a separate variable. So we'll say int index. Start that one also at 0, and increment it whenever you do use it. So now you have an index of what you're looking at inside of your data array, and you have a separate index for the place that you're storing into inside of new array, because they can be one off from each other. So storing them as two separate variables solves that problem. I believe this solution will work, but as I said, we need to exclude the case where that value just doesn't exist. So that's where we use int array contains, which I don't think I actually implemented yet. So let's not worry about it. Let me just see if we can get the path. So we won't call this test just yet, because I'm just testing the case where we are actually removing something. So let's see if this test here passes. Yes. So this test does pass because we do this clever thing here with the two indexes. Note, if I don't do that, if I try to use I, probably should get an error here. Let's make sure we do. Yeah, so we get some error. So now, like I said, there's another case that you would have had to have implemented if you did the homework, and all of you did. All of you got that right. This is the reason I'm not going into it. But this is the tricky part. So not using array list and trying to think of just how do we construct a new, slightly smaller array and start copying things over from a slightly bigger array, excluding one of its values. Well, that was I would say, a non-trivial little algorithm. This is how I would do it. This is the shortest way I could think to do it. Many of you had slightly different solutions, but I would say that is the way to do it without using some kind of power tool like a list. One piece of advice that I've given some of you who have scheduled office hours with me is that when you're working on these Canvas modules, let me pull one up here. So let's suppose you're about to go into module 2. Module 2. So there's a lot of stuff in these modules, right? There's these learning objectives. You got a fair amount of reading and other materials in Canvas. I would recommend that the first thing you do is try to do the lab and homework. I would suggest you do that before you do the reading, honestly. That's just my opinion. I think you should download the homework and the lab and read the tests. That should be the very first thing you do. Download and read the tests. So if it was the last assignment, you would have downloaded and started reading through the tests. Like I said in one of my other videos, if you don't understand the tests, do ask questions. I think the second thing you should do is try to actually just do the homework. A lot of times you'll find that you could do the homework before you do the readings. And oftentimes, if that's true, then you'll understand the readings better when you do go to read them. And even if it's not true and you realize that you get stuck, you'll be able to go into the readings with with something specific that you're looking for. So that's my recommendation. Try the homework first. Do that before you do any readings. Use it as a motivator for your learning. All right. See you next time.